Tonight, President Biden's approval numbers underwater, even his handling of COVID not getting high marks. Was the California recall a one-off or a pathway to victory for the Democrats? We'll get into that and more bombshell headlines on Facebook. They know the social media site is making us more angry. They know Instagram makes teenage girls feel worse about themselves. Should we expect them to do better as corporate citizens? Great to have you with us tonight. The Donlon Report starts right now. Good evening. President Biden tonight says the country is at an inflection point. He was pitching an economic message, but it could also probably apply to his administration. When Joe Biden was elected, many thought it was a reset, a pendulum swing away from the chaotic news cycle of the Trump presidency. But the first 8 months of Biden's term have been packed with big events, hurdles, and stumbles. The latter there would include a sloppy withdrawal from Afghanistan and the chaos that went along with it. You've probably heard poll numbers are like bikinis. They show a lot, but not everything. And that's certainly the case with the latest Quinnipiac poll. That's why we wanted to get into it more. Here's an example. On Afghanistan, Americans approve of the president's decision to pull U.S. troops out, but they give him a negative 31 to 65 score on the way he handled the exit. Add to that several other issues, perhaps the biggest being COVID and the resurgence of the Delta variant. The president's move to promote vaccine mandates has been divisive. Now states are even suing to stop them. And he's working to push a $3.5 trillion spending bill through Congress, a huge plan that doesn't even have at this point the full support of his party. So add it all up, and 70% of those polled in this Quinnipiac poll say they are dissatisfied with the way things are going in the nation right now. For the first time in this poll, President Biden has dropped into negative territory on his overall rating, 42% approving, 50% disapproving of the way he's handling his job. One of the Quinnipiac analysts said, if there ever was a honeymoon for President Biden, it is clearly over. Where is the pulse of America tonight on politics, COVID, and more? Did we learn anything from the California recall election? And what's ahead for President Biden? That's where we start tonight. And we're glad to have two guests, Rochelle Ritchie, former Democratic Congressional Press Secretary, and former National Republican Committee member Pat Brady, with us here in our Chicago studios. Rochelle, let's start with you, and let's go back to May. The president's approval rating on COVID was 60%. We knew Afghanistan would hurt him, but I think many probably felt he would rebound from that, but he's actually gone the other way. How and why?
Well, I think the poll really reflects how American voters feel right now. You know, we all looked at it and said, you know, we need to get out of Afghanistan. We've been there way too long. We spent way too much money. Too many people have died. But then again, it is the how it happened. And it seemed that it was a rush to do something that every administration, including the one that Biden worked for under Obama, was planning to do. So again, it seems like, why was it so rushed and why weren't we prepared? But I think there's a lot of things that are hurting Biden right now, including the infighting that is happening with Democrats when you talk about the infrastructure bill and different things like that. It's almost like you have moderates and those staunch Democrats, but then you also have these progressives. So you have these three groups all under one party, and they can't seem to get along right now.
Pat, 70% not happy with the direction right now. Did that number surprise you?
Yeah, and in every category, the economy, the Afghanistan pullout, COVID, he's really underwater. In fact, he's underwater in a lot of the swing states. I think the near-term import of what's going to happen in the midterm elections, and historically, the out of the White House party does better, anyway between 48 and 62 House seats they pick up. Joe Biden's getting into that danger territory. We kind of saw with Barack Obama in 2010 when I think we won 63 seats. And kind of similar, it's not apples to apples completely, but if we pass this big $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill, I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that we're probably spending more money than we have. So they have a lot of headwinds going into the next election.
Rochelle, where are we on COVID as a country? Do you think deaths are up? We have these debates over vaccine mandates, mask mandates. It remains a politically divisive issue.
It is a politically divisive issue. And for me, I know I've talked to you about this, but for me personally, my father died of COVID September 25th of 2020. He was 57 years old. And so I think as more people start to see the impact of COVID personally, I think more people will hopefully go out there and get the vaccine. I am a little concerned about how this mask mandate is going to impact businesses, especially with this federal mandate that Biden brought down, because I worry that you're going to have a lot of people that are out of work and they're having to decide, do I put food on the table or do I stand up for what I feel is my own personal right when it comes to my health? That's a little aggressive to me, but I think that more people do need to look at the seriousness of COVID, and I think we have to do a better job in really telling people what this virus can really do to the body.
It has hurt the president, do you think, Pat? And it also, I think, is an interesting reflection of what's happened in California in the recall election, because as much as COVID was really, I guess, the reason for this, or a big reason for the recall.
Well, when you go to, during the middle of a pandemic, when you go to a fancy wine place, that
exactly.
Doesn't help either.
But in the end, it's what saved him. I mean, two-thirds in an exit poll, as I saw, supported mask mandates in school.
But I do think for Democrats in states like where we sit here in Illinois, the short-term gain of all this money, cleaning up some of the debt, not making to make tough elected leaders have to make tough calls on raising taxes. That all changes this spring when we get into the next election cycle, into the 2022 election. It's going to be more back to normal on fiscal issues, and I do believe that people are waking up to the amount of debt, how big the deficit is, and how much debt we've accumulated. And I think that's going to be a big issue in the election.
What did we learn from California, Rochelle? What do you think? Is this a one-off? Is it just so unusual and unique because California is so blue? There isn't much to learn from this?
Yeah, I remember I talked about this in March, and I said, look, this is like, he's going to keep his seat. You know, when you look at the fact that Republican registration in California has dropped by, I think, about 20%, and that Democrats in California have about 4.1 million registered Democrat voters compared to 2 million Republicans. I mean, it was really a waste of time and money when you really think about it. But this just shows that, you know, if the Democrats are really serious about implementing policies that people really are going to appreciate, they have to do better on messaging. I think messaging is the biggest issue that they are facing right now, because really it's kind of all over the place. And again, that's why I was saying you have your moderates, your Democrats, your progressive, and the messaging is not consistent.
Well, you could certainly argue the messaging was good in California. They labeled this
sure.
as a Republican recall, and I think that resonated.
A Trump recall. That's really
exactly. And it's set up on national terms as well, because Larry Elder came in and espoused some of the things that Trump did as well. In the end, though, I think, you know, Newsom tried to bring up that he didn't want California to become another Texas and kind of nationalize this. Sure. Is this something you think we'll see moving forward?
Yeah, and the Trump effect, and I think one of the things that the Democrats, I think, are going into headwinds in the next election, as I mentioned before, but I think and you tell me what you think, that the Democrats, I don't think, they don't have Trump to be energized about anymore, like we did in 10. We were just so angry about the Obamacare and the big spending that Republicans turned out. And I think you see the infighting that you've described in the Democratic Party, and are they motivated to come out again like they were? Because they came out in droves against Trump, and I just don't see that in 2022. But it will be a nationalized election in some way.
You got to find that unified thing that makes people angry.
Right.
And right now,
Trump was easy.
Right. Trump was the easy target. And right now you don't have that, because right now you just have the Democrats angry at each other. And the Republicans are just sitting back like, okay.
But they are running.
Wait a minute, we have a little bit of anger.
Okay.
but they are running candidates who embody Trump, though, correct? I mean, Larry Elder.
Well, that is true. But Larry Elder doesn't have the star power
nobody knows
of Trump. And, you know, nobody was really familiar with him too much either. So.
Well, he sure changed the dynamic of that election the minute he popped in, and he jumped right up to the top right away. I want to show you guys a poll here that we have that shows presidential approval 8 months into office. So this is basically sort of a temperature check of where we stand, and this is just a handful of them. And there were some things that stood out to us. For one, W, they're at 83%. And HW, his dad, that was 9/11. You have to consider a lot of things in this. You know, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton both, I think, initially had big packages that they tried to get passed through, and then tried to recenter. Both of them were reelected, even though their numbers are small. What do you make of these, Pat?
Interesting that President Obama's at 53%. I think the health care bill passed, I think, in the spring. And his numbers, our mantra was, if this passes, we're going to win. Then we went into fire Pelosi. But his numbers were pretty good. But I'm surprised, didn't realize President Trump was at 39%.
Yeah.
And W was right after 9/11, so he was that high. But all this discussion, we've got a long way to go. A lot of things can happen.
Yeah, Rochelle, let's talk about that, because ahead is, as we mentioned, this spending package. We're talking about a somewhat controversial tax package. Is this going to fly, do you think? Where, as you pointed out, even within the Democratic Party, tax the rich on one side. Where does this fall? You have Joe Manchin, you have Kyrsten Sinema. Where does this go, do you think?
They're going to have a huge fight because right now you have those progressives that are pretty upset that there's not this whole tax the rich agenda in there. They're also upset. There's another policy, I can't recall it, I'm sorry, but there's another policy that they're pretty upset about as well. But I think that they're going to have to do something, because if this does not pass, you risk looking disorganized and you risk looking divided. And with the midterm elections coming up and we have redistricting going on in the next 2 weeks or so, the Democrats are going to have to get on a unified, the same train, because Republicans, even though they may not like necessarily each other's policies, they do stay unified. And the Democrats are not doing that. And I feel like you're going to have some Democrats that say, look, they can't get it together, especially independents, because of the reason why Biden's numbers are dropping so much are really because of those independent voters. So if the independent voter says, you know what, I really don't, like, Biden, but I can't, get him out of office until 2024, let me just go ahead and try to turn the House blue. Or turn the House red. So I feel like that's the risk that they're really taking right now.
All right. Rochelle Ritchie and Pat Brady, it's like dinner time conversation right here.
Always good.
Good to have you both in studio. Thank you very much. We're going to move on now to another topic that has certainly helped us tune into the pulse of America. That is social media. The Wall Street Journal reported earlier this week that Facebook knows Instagram is toxic for teen girls, and not much is being done about it. So now, in response to the reporting, Senators Marsha Blackburn and Richard Blumenthal are launching a bipartisan probe into the tech giant. Heather Gardner, host of the Divided State of America. A lot of people are upset about this. It's great to have you with us. And I think we all knew, Heather, this was the case. But to hear it laid out like this, that it's toxic and Facebook knows it, was sort of jarring.
Right. I mean, anyone who goes on any social media app, but specifically Instagram, which is the one that's being attacked here by the Wall Street Journal, everyone knows that you have that FOMO, you have that, oh, their life is so much better. And it does create this toxic environment. But to know that Facebook has independently studied this and has been holding on to this information for years now is the worrying part.
So let's listen to the head of Instagram on a podcast recently comparing social media to cars. We'll listen to this and get your comment after.
Cars have positive and negative outcomes. We understand that. We know that more people die than would otherwise because of car accidents, but by and large, cars create way more value in the world than they destroy. And I think social media is similar.
So, Heather, he's getting a lot of pushback on this, and some people, I guess, if you take it to the next step, are going to get run over, and some people are going to die. But this isn't exactly apples to apples.
It's definitely not, because when you look at the car industry and think about how much federal regulation and how much state regulation and all the rules and red tape that cars have to go to before they are put on us, the consumer. And then you look at what Facebook and social media and the internet in general, and how really there's a lack of regulation on the federal level and the state level. So comparing these two things is definitely not apples to apples.
Given the choice of a car or Facebook, it'd be interesting to see. I don't know. Hey, in this day and age of division and anger, knowing that these social media platforms make both worse, I guess. Does it have a responsibility, Heather, to let us know, to be sort of a good corporate citizen, or are the risks up to the users?
Well, that's the conversation that we're having now nationally, is whose responsibility is it? And right now, it really has fallen onto just us, the consumers, because we are the ones who hold our phones in our hands every single day. And there has been it's been lacking, the regulation on this. But, our national conversation is changing on this. We want to see these companies at least be transparent. I think that's the most jarring thing about this, is that they've known for so many years. They have confirmed our suspicions as users, and we're keeping it from us.
Yeah, so we talked about Congress calling for a hearing on this. What do you think could and should be changed, and could be changed fairly easily to make this better?
Well, one of the things that 3 senators actually put forward today is they sent a letter to the CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, directly saying, please rethink what they're calling Instagram youth. Now, BuzzFeed broke this earlier this year, that because so many users under the age of 13 are already on Instagram, that Facebook, the parent company, wants to launch one specifically made for kids. And they're saying, you know what, based on this information we know now, maybe we just pause this, and that's really the steps that they're taking today.
Yeah. The hard thing about this, Heather, is that so many the kids, especially, they probably realize the dangers of this and are uncomfortable with it, but they know not being on it is probably not even an option either, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I had the luxury of knowing what it was like, the world, what it was like before Facebook and Instagram and social media in general. But kids nowadays, it's just a part of their day-to-day life. 2-year-olds know how to use Facebook and Instagram. In fact, fun story, my 2-year-old niece actually bought a condo on Facebook the other day. I mean, she knows how to use social media. So to say that we can just eliminate it from our lives seems completely unreasonable.
Well, this is getting an awful lot of attention. And Heather Gardner, TV host, we are glad you stopped by to talk with us about it. Appreciate the time.
I'm as well. Thank you so much, Don.
Dramatic police body camera footage released today following an altercation between a missing woman, Gabby Petito, and her fiance. The latest on a national search and a plea from her parents as well. But up next, a former USA gymnast who blew the whistle on abuse allegations years before Larry Nassar. Does she feel vindicated after yesterday's testimony on Capitol Hill? And don't forget, you can follow us on social media at the Donlon Report. It'd be Joe Donlon. Don's my dad, by the way. No worries, Heather. I appreciate you coming on. We'll be back after this.
USAG and USOPC chose to ignore abuse for decades.
And I also blame an entire system that enabled and perpetrated his abuse.
My abuse was enough, and we deserve justice.
We need to remember the pain that occurred when our folks failed to do their jobs.
Just part of the Senate hearing yesterday, 4 USA gymnasts made clear the FBI failed to protect them and hundreds of other victims of former USA Gymnastics team Dr. Larry Nassar. Joining me now to discuss the failure and the fallout from that hearing is gymnast Jennifer Say, 1986 gymnastics champion, also producer for the documentary Athlete A. It's great to have you with us tonight, Jennifer. This problem was on full display yesterday, and you've been trying to ring this bell for years. As you watched this hearing, did you feel like finally everyone is listening?
Yeah, it does feel like everybody's listening. It sure took a lot of effort, though. I mean, it's kind of absurd that it would take hundreds, literally hundreds, of girls and young women to come forward about Larry Nassar. And, you know, I do want to know, I was a gymnast in the 80s. You know, this kind of abuse and cruelty, which also includes physical and emotional abuse, has been a part of the sport since as long as I can remember. So it is good that there is a reckoning. I hope that something is done now.
Right. You mentioned hundreds and hundreds of victims. That's how I guess it's hard for those of us on the outside looking in to try to wrap our heads around how in the world this happens without someone along the way stepping in and saying this has to stop.
Well, I mean, you have to understand what the culture is like. It really is one that demands total obedience from these young athletes. And so, you know, people often ask, didn't anyone come forward? Why didn't anyone come forward? Young women have been coming forward since 1997 to report this to USAG, to their personal coaches, to their club coaches, to the local police. And everybody just took his word for it. And they ignored these girls and often discredited and belittled them. And that's really sort of the culture in the sport. It's one of incredible cruelty that, as I said, demands total obedience. It takes great courage to even come forward, you know, that first step, because that is stepping outside of the culture and what is required of you. And then to add insult on top of injury, these young women have been abused already, and then to not be heard and listened to and to just be dismissed and discredited, which Michaela described brilliantly yesterday, as did Allie, is just, that's the heartbreaking piece. It's just heartbreak on top of heartbreak.
Yeah, I want to play for you, Jennifer, a clip from our broadcast yesterday. We talked with retired FBI agent Bobby Chacon. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
It's a stain on the agency that I love and represented for 27 years, and know that the good work of the men and women of the FBI, that they do it every day, is tarnished.
So the FBI failed, that much is clear, but it seems like there is plenty of blame to go around here, Jennifer. And the question yesterday was, where are the indictments? So how do you answer that, and how do you determine who else should be held accountable and how?
Well, I think an investigation, as Ali has called for. They know so much already about who knew what when. Steve Penny, who was the head of USAG at the time, it's clear and it's documented that he knew for a very long time, he knew for years that this was going on, and he continued to let Nasser operate as the team doctor. He knew other girls were being abused. There are leaders that supported him at USAG in covering this up. That's a good place to start. I want to know who knew at the U.S. Olympic Committee, at the USOPC. They oversee all the national governing bodies for all of the Olympic sports. Is this happening across the board? I don't think this is unique to gymnastics.
Do you think it's still going on? I saw one of your quotes that said it's a cult and you don't dare speak out.
I think the thing we have to remember is this is not a one bad apple situation. This is a culture that silences the athletes. That is part of the culture. It's an incredibly cruel culture. The coaching methodology is cruel. And it was almost the inevitable outcome of a culture that is so incredibly abusive in all ways. And these young women, these girls, these athletes are told, you're wrong about everything. They're being disallowed food. They're being fat shamed. They're training on injuries. They don't, the world is sort of upside down because all the while they're being told that they're lazy and fat. And so when this kind of abuse happens and they're told it's nothing, it's you, you're wrong, imagine the courage it takes to stand in the truth and know that what happened to you is wrong when all the signs and all the signals coming at you are you're lying and you're wrong and that it's you that's the problem. That's the culture that needs to be torn down and rebuilt.
Well, that's what we saw in full display yesterday. And another one of your tweets caught my eye. Kids are beaten into silence in service of the machine. That is absolutely troubling. And Jennifer Say, we appreciate your time in helping us shed some light on this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for covering the subject.
You bet. A lot being said and written about President Trump and General Milley. A lot of questions over what to believe. Up next, the author of another book that quoted Milley will join us. And the U.S. makes a deal to build a nuclear submarine for Australia in reaction to China. And at least one of our friends isn't happy about it. A lot to go at there, and we'll do that ahead. The reports this week from Peril, a book co-authored by veteran journalist Bob Woodward, detailed full-throated conflict between former President Trump and his top general. But it wasn't the first time we've heard such stories. Journalist Michael Bender reported in his book, Frankly, We Did Win This Election, that Trump and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Mark Milley clashed, for example, over how to stop rioting last summer. In one part of the book, Trump yells at Milley, "You can't effing talk to me like that," to which former Attorney General William Barr replies, "He's right, Mr. President. The general is right." Trump administration insiders have called into question the accounts by Bender, Woodward, and others. But should they? Well, let's ask Michael Bender himself. He joins us now, the White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Michael, it's good to see you again. So you've heard this pushback that Woodward is getting. He's trying to sell books, and I'm sure you got some of that as well. What would you say to people who wonder about the reliability of these stories and quotes?
Well, I would say for my book, there's nothing in here, Joe, that is single source. Everything is reported. All the scenes I have in this book, all the conversations are happened in front of other people. I have multiple sources on it. It's been fact checked, and I've spoken with the president several times about the content in my book. And yes, he has attacked me, singled out my book for some of the reporting I have on the conversations, the disagreements between him and Mark Milley. But that's because the president knows who I was talking to, frankly. I mean, he knows that people who were not usually talking to reporters, don't normally talk to reporters, spoke to me at great lengths for this book.
Why do you think that was, Michael? I mean, were they liberated, you think, to open up to you and tell you some of these things now that it was over?
Yeah, I think there's a number of reasons people talk to me for this book. One is I've covered this administration, these campaigns, the world around Trump now for 6 years. These are relationships I've built over a long time. They trusted my reporting from my track record at the Wall Street Journal. And then there can be knives out in Trump world, quite honestly. Sure. And some people were concerned if they didn't tell their story that others would tell tell it for them. And finally, the other reason was it was really cathartic, I think, for a lot of people. I mean, 2020, which is the story of my book, from the first impeachment to the second impeachment. It was a year that we've never seen in this country before, and it was almost therapeutic for people to talk to me in ways that they really, frankly, couldn't talk to Trump at the time about what they'd seen and what they'd gone through, and some of the decisions that had been made.
So you talked to a lot of people who knew Trump and Milley. I'm curious what you found, especially in light of what we're hearing about Woodward's book. What was their relationship like?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, comes to life really in my book for the first time here. Behind the scenes, the role that Milley played, particularly as a guardrail in this administration. We didn't really hear a lot about this in real time, but it was Mark Milley who was the loudest and most adamant pushing back when Trump, for example, wanted to put uniformed military soldiers in the streets of the U.S. Capitol and major American cities. Someone like Milley, who's led troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, he knows the difference between the National Guard, which is trained as a quasi law enforcement agency in effect, and the 82nd Airborne, which is 20-something-year-olds who are trained to kill and take land. And there was a lot of really resonant scenes in this book that people recalled. At one point, Milley pointing to a portrait of Abraham Lincoln over Trump's shoulder in the Oval Office and telling him, that man, Mr. President, that man had an insurrection. What we have is a protest.
Michael, before we let you go here, I'm curious, in all of these books, no matter the stories, whether you believe them or not, there appears to be a common theme here in all of them, and that is that it was a very confrontational and chaotic Oval Office. That much of it doesn't seem to be disputed.
Yeah, I think that's right, Joe. But what surprised me in the reporting for my book is it went beyond that. Even we all kind of know the story of chaos. You don't have to cover it every day like I did it for the Wall Street Journal over at the White House every day. It was coming across our phones and across our the cryons on the cable screens to know and understand the chaos. What surprised me was how the people around this president thought he'd become dangerous in his desperation to hold on to office. To the point where he was literally telling his military that he wanted to shoot Americans. And he wanted peaceful protesters shot in the leg and shot in the feet, their skulls cracked, in order to put those protests down around after George Floyd's death.
Hard to believe. In the past 4 years, there have been, I think, somewhere around 1,200 books written about President Trump. In the 10 seconds we have left, Michael, is there anything left to be said? Are there more books to come? More stories?
Well, yeah. So the one thing I'm always surprised at is how often this former president surprises me and what he'll do next. But I do think what makes this book stand out among all of the rest is not just these scenes with Mark Milley, but I spent a lot of time with the people who go to 40 and 50 and 60 rallies, no kidding, under the hood of the campaign to give a full 360-degree view of what happened in 2020.
All right, Michael Bender, author of Frankly, We Did Win This Election, White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Again, Michael, thanks for your time. It's good to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Now to China. The editor of the country's state-run newspaper, Global Times, proffering an ominous warning on Twitter, saying the U.S. is breaking rules of international waters near China. He posted, "The day will come soon when Chinese warships pass through the Caribbean Sea or show up near Hawaii and Guam." Meantime, the U.S., the UK, and Australia striking a deal on nuclear submarines, with China responding. The three countries should shake off their Cold War mentality. So Cold War or just plain chilly? Let's ask John Jordan, former naval intelligence officer, and Gordon Chang, author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon, we'll start with you. There are a lot of people upset about this, including France. They got left out. They're not happy. Why'd we leave them out of this?
Well, the Australians had contracted to buy French submarines. And at the time, which was a half decade ago, that really was a bad decision on the part of Australia. Australia should have bought Japanese submarines, which were better, quieter, and were actually, those submarines existed, and the French submarines didn't. Those were sort of like promise in the sky. So the fact that the French get cut out, yeah, it's regrettable that the French are unhappy, but it is the right decision to go for submarines from the United States and the UK.
Yeah, John, I was curious about that because if Australia wanted to pick a dance partner to build a submarine fleet, why not the U.S.?
Well, the issue here really is diesel-electric submarines versus nuclear submarines and Australia's security needs going forward. Diesel-electric submarines have to surface every day or every few hours. That places some real constraints on their operation. A nuclear submarine can be submerged for its entire deployment, like we do it, for 60 to 90 days, and is only limited by food and crew endurance. So this nuclear-powered submarine can operate unsupported over a wider range of ocean. And now with the emergence of China and China's aggressiveness, that's necessary. That's a necessary capability for the Royal Australian Navy, and that's why they went with nuclear power.
Former Prime Minister Paul Keating of Australia had an interesting quote that said, if the U.S. military with all its might couldn't beat a bunch of Taliban rebels with AK-47 rifles and pickup trucks, what chance would it have in a full-blown war with China? Gordon, I'll tee that one up for you. What is this agreement? What does the message send to China?
Well, the message that is sent to China is that, first of all, the region is pulling together, and it's not just the region. It's, of course, Europe as well. But also, really, Paul Keating's comments, which are always very pro-Beijing, come right out of the Global Times, the Communist Party tabloid. And really what Australia is doing is saying that they are willing to participate with the United States and with regional partners to protect South China Sea and East China Sea, which are actually quite far from Australia. So this is a message to Beijing that they've made a lot of enemies recently, and it's a good message for us because it does help to bolster deterrence, and deterrence is actually been breaking down over the last several months.
I want to get you guys each on one other thing. Hopefully we're up against the clock here, but John, let's talk about something that happened on the broadcast yesterday. We talked with Colonel Tony Schaefer. He was concerned about Afghanistan and Bagram, and he dropped this little nugget on us as we were talking about General Milley. Listen.
Again, we've seen Milley has made some very significant strategic mistakes. I would argue, if nothing else, he should be relieved over the Bagram debacle. And guess, Joe, my sources are telling me, guess who's moving into Bagram? The Chinese. So we have some real national security issues here.
John, what do you make of that?
Well, Bagram's a state-of-the-art facility. We spent a ton of money upgrading. It's vastly superior to Karzai International Airport. Wouldn't surprise me if the Chinese did want to secure it. The Chinese won't want to occupy all of Afghanistan, but they'll want to cut a deal with the Taliban, if nothing else, for basing rights there and possibly for mineral exploitation later on. But General Milley, you know, he can't overrule, obviously, the President of the United States, whether it's President Trump or President Biden. But if something is really not in the interest of the United States, he has an obligation to protest, and if that doesn't carry the day, to resign. So if nothing else, General Milley has proven himself at a minimum to be a self-promoting milquetoast.
Well, Gordon, I'll give you the last word on this, because the thing we wondered about yesterday is no matter where you are on this, whether you believe it or not, whether you think it's unusual or wrong, essentially he called his Chinese counterpart and let him know if the U.S. were to launch a strike, he'd give him a heads up. And I think more troubling is that it at least gave the Chinese an indication that he felt President Trump was unstable.
Yes, and also what Milley did was he reinforced the notion in Beijing that the U.S. is in disarray. And that, I am sure, has emboldened Beijing. So he's made the region and the U.S. less safe. There are other things that he did which we could talk about, but ultimately, this was not only a mistake, this was breaking the chain of command. This was unconstitutional. He should be relieved immediately and maybe even tried for treason.
Gordon Chang, China expert, and John Jordan, former naval intelligence officer, as our producers said today. Jordan and Gordon, great to have you both with us tonight. Appreciate the time. A dramatic day in the case of Gabby Petito. We see police body camera footage showing an altercation between her and her fiance. On the same day, her family makes an emotional plea to her fiance and his family. What to do with 8,000 migrants who are camped out under a bridge in Del Rio, Texas. That and more ahead. The search continues for 22-year-old Gabby Petito, missing since late last month after road tripping with her boyfriend. As we're getting our first look now at body camera video from an altercation between Gabby and her boyfriend last month in Utah. For more on this case, I want to welcome in News Nation's Brian Enton live outside the boyfriend's house, and also Ashley Banfield, who's been covering this, host of Banfield here on News Nation. Brian, let's start with you. Give us the latest on this case.
Well, Brian Laundrie still not cooperating with police, and it's really got detectives very, very frustrated. We believe he is still inside this house behind me with his parents, and just so heartbreaking today. Gabby's parents wrote this letter to Brian's parents, basically begging them, please have your son speak out. We believe your son is the last person who was with Gabby, and we need any information that he has. And they basically said, look, please just even tell us if we're searching in the wrong area. Also today, you mentioned this new body camera video from Utah from August 12th while they were on that journey in their van when they got into some kind of altercation. I want to play you one clip right now from that body camera.
Some days I have really bad OCD, and I was just cleaning and straightening up the back of the van before, and I was apologizing to him and saying, I'm sorry that I'm so mean.
Tell me what's going on. Mercedes gets worked up sometimes, and I try and really distance myself from her, so like I locked the car and I walked away from her.
It's basically Brian and Gabby there talking about the fight they had. It was apparently so bad that a witness called police was concerned about their safety. Joe.
Brian, let's bring Ashley in as well on this, because Ashley, as I saw this, it seemed to me afterwards this was resolved by police sending Brian to a hotel and allowing Gabby to take the van. How critical is this incident in Moab to the investigation?
I mean, I think it's critical because it's, first of all, the last time we see her on video, and it shows a domestic disturbance. I think what's very interesting is that they had to be separated, and that at one point in this video, if you watch it start to finish, she is very upset about something that happened prior to the police catching up with them at this spot. The incident actually happened before they got to this spot. And the incident was witnessed by a man who said he saw her trying to get into the van. The doors were locked, and it appeared that Brian, the fiance, was in the driver's seat of the van locking her out. And she went around to the driver's window and crawled in it, scrambling over top of him at the steering wheel. So it kind of tells you she was worried she was going to be left behind somewhere and had to scramble to get into a vehicle. And what do you know, Joe? She's not with him now, and he had the van. So I think it's significant that that happened, right. that she was struggling to get into a van at some point. But apart from that, it's not necessarily a crime. It didn't rise to a level of a crime. They separated them, as police will often do in a domestic. They gave her the van and him a hotel because she owns the van. Okay.
Hey, Brian, I know the question that everyone watching has been asking is, why isn't Brian cooperating? Why aren't police questioning him? Why isn't he saying where they were last together? Anything that would help find her.
Well, that is the big question, and we ask it every day. We ask it to Brian's attorney, and we ask it to the police. Basically, the attorney put out a statement saying, look, I am advising Brian and his parents not to talk. Oftentimes, the significant others are unfairly blamed in these situations, and it's in my client's best interest to keep his mouth shut. We've asked police, why can't you force him to come in? Isn't he sort of interfering with this missing persons investigation? And basically, right now, they're very clear this is not a criminal case at this point, and they say they just don't have the rights right now to bring him in.
Ashley, I know you had Gabby's dad on earlier this week. I want to play just a clip from your show, and we'll talk again after.
No, and I said it before, no, I haven't seen red flags, but that's not something you're going to tell your dad, because your dad's a fixer, right? No dad wants to see their daughter cry. So, no, if I would have seen a red flag, I'd be all up in arms about it. But to be honest, I hadn't.
All right, Ashley, that was earlier this week. You have him back on tonight. That part about no dad wants to see his daughter cry certainly hits a lot of people. And she was crying in this new video that he hadn't seen at that point when you did the interview. I'm guessing it'll be a different interview tonight.
Yes, I think it's going to be a different interview, Joe. And by the way, thank God for Brian Enton, keeping post outside of the Laundrie house to see if there's any movement at all, because I get it. They're trying to protect their son, but there's a missing woman. And that's also important. And to that note, Joe, when I speak with Gabby's dad tonight, I'm going to ask him about the letter that he and Gabby's mom and those two families who are separated, they're divorced, but they're working together on this. They have put a letter out there publicly appealing publicly, please, Mr. and Mrs. Laundrie, help us at least isolate the last place that he saw Gabby so that we know where to look. So now things have changed, that they have come out publicly, Gabby's mother, father, stepfather, to appeal to the goodwill of the parents of that fiance. You may not want to offer him up to the police, but at least tell us where he last saw her. And I can't imagine the desperation that they all feel about that.
Right. We will be looking for that tonight. Ashley Banfield, it runs at 10 Eastern, 9 Central. Brian Enton, great to have you with us as well. Thank you both for the update.
Sure thing.
You can catch Ashley's full interview tonight with Gabby Petito's dad, reacting to the body cam footage. It's, again, tonight's Banfield, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 Central, right here on News Nation. Going to turn now to the southern border, where roughly 8,000 migrants are currently awaiting processing under a bridge in Del Rio, Texas. Joining me now for more on this, News Nation's Marky Martin. Marky, these images are just astounding. Almost 10,000 migrants are waiting to be processed, and this all just happened recently, like in the last week or so. Is that right?
Yeah, and really just in the last few days, this video speaks to the desperation being felt along the southern border. 8,300 migrants now waiting for asylum under that bridge. That's that international bridge right there in Del Rio, Texas. And just how quickly has this crowd grown? Just this weekend, that number was 2,000, Joe. Humanitarian groups there in the area say most of these people are coming in from Haiti, Venezuela, and Cuba. And why this area in particular? This bridge is actually a staging area for federal officials to load these migrants up by the hundreds onto buses and take them to undisclosed areas right outside that city to DHS facilities, which I might add are at capacity. But we've seen this bridge multiple times this year in the news. We've seen a lot of political delegations here this year. Here's today, Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez.
This is as bad as it's ever been. It's as if there's a flash mob here in Del Rio. This ends one way, a policy decision. This occurred because of a policy decision from the White House.
No tag. And Joe, we can tell you as of today, we have those official numbers from August. In that month alone, CBP officers encountered just shy of 209,000 migrants, bringing the total number for the year to almost 1.75 million.
Marky
Joe.
Martin, thank you very much for the update. American Snapshot coming up next. Weather, waves, and 2 claws won't stop her. And she's 101. Tonight's American Snapshot, Deadliest Catch, Grandma Edition. 101-year-old Virginia Oliver has been trapping lobsters since she was 8, and she is still going strong. Virginia gets our American Snapshot tonight. Thanks for joining us. Leland is next.